deliver as well at these conferences over the last year or so. So, in terms of what I'm going to talk about building high-performance PMOs. Now, when I go into different organizations, one thing I always realize is that nobody has it all figured out. We are all on a journey to PMO maturity. We're all on that journey trying to get our projects to align to strategy. And I always think that PPM is a bit like being a parent. You can talk to all of the experts, you can attend all the different seminars, but nobody has it all figured out. In fact, one of the most important skills we actually have in PPM is we have to learn to roll with it, to adjust. PPM is not classical music, it's jazz. You've got to adapt and you've got to roll and you evolve as things go on. However, one thing I've found is that the issues that organizations face are very, very similar. If I was to take the first one, there is always a friction between strategy and execution in every organization. Alignment is a huge challenge. Very often organizations don't even have visibility, which is where PPM tools come in. So that's really the first stage in getting that strategic alignment. The other thing I find is that if I go into an organization and I talk about project management, portfolio management, or product management, it's very hard for senior leadership teams to engage. They tend to switch off when I mention those terms. So one thing I've learned over the years is don't talk about project or product management, talk about change management, and suddenly senior leadership teams are very interested in discussing it. But that is what PPM is. It's the execution of change, the evolution of change within our organization to ensure we're continually being relevant. The other thing I'm finding more and more is that traditional project management, as important as it is no longer enough to keep up with the advances and the level of rapid change and advancement within organizations. But the paradox of that is the governance structure that's in traditional project management has never been more important than ever before. The other thing we also find is organizations all strive for a standard methodology. So typically that's around a more traditional methodology, maybe using the principles of Lean or PMBOK or whatever it may be. But what we actually also realize is we want to give people the principles of Agile to be more flexible and adaptive to change. So that's another paradox. And the biggest issue I find everywhere is there is more project initiatives than people within almost every organization in the world. And that's the biggest challenge. And the real issue is we're actually creating the very problem that we're trying to solve. And that's almost we're in this cycle of continuous chaos, and we actually create it ourselves. What is also happening is organizations, in fact even countries, are now recognizing that PPM is a strategic competency. At the moment, India has a position paper, which is essentially its 5-year plan, and it has defined PPM as a strategic competency successful to the future of the country. That's an incredible endorsement for PPM, but it's not unique. In the US, we see them setting up the CIO, a strategic initiative for rolling out IT projects, and they're managing an annual pipeline in excess of $100 billion. In the UK, they've set up the Major Projects Academy, and they're running a pipeline of in excess of £500 billion in that. What's quite interesting about the UK's example is they've actually said that the skills that people need to deliver complex projects like that are totally different to traditional project management, and they've set up a project leadership academy to make sure that not just the complexity of the projects, but the people are actually developing the skills and competencies to match those challenges. Even in a small country like my own, I have to give the Irish a plug, nobody notices us, small country. So even in Ireland, only last December, our own civil service have defined that project management is now a strategic competency successful to the future of the country. So they've also defined that it's now the art and skill of project management is now a core competency for all managers. So that's incredible. Just as we expect managers to have people skills, we now expect managers to have project management skills. It's that important. So these are big changes that are going on. And why it's so important that we do, I couldn't find the data in medical devices, but to give you the challenge we have, or the opportunity perhaps in solving it, to bring a pharmaceutical product to market now, the minimum it's costing is $4 billion. It actually goes up to $11 million for some organizations. I couldn't find the data to support that for medical devices. Maybe somebody in the room knows. If you do, please share it with me at some stage over the 2 days. But the other thing we actually can realize about medical devices is the opportunity. So over the next 5 years, medical devices is going to, there's an opportunity there. It's going to expand by $100 billion over the next 5 years. And I think that no matter how good your products are, it's your execution. Your ability to bring those to market to execute will be just as important as the products you develop, and that's where PPM and having effective PMOs comes in. And I think the real question we have to ask ourselves is, how prepared are you for this opportunity? How much of that $100 billion is going to go to your organization? Do you have the skills and competencies? Are you project ready to meet this challenge? Now, the other thing that comes with that, and this is a positive thing for us, there are now more jobs than ever in project management because of that. So if you're in the looking, it's a great opportunity for you. If you're hiring, it's going to be a major challenge. So the research indicates that over the next 10 years, there's going to be an additional requirement for somewhere between 15 and 40 million new jobs, depending on what data you look at. So while we're seeing in lots of sectors and industries and countries that there is a labour abundance in certain areas, when it comes to project management, there's actually a talent shortage. So this is the challenge we're in. And that's the good news. There's a huge opportunity. The bad news is the traditional skills of project management are simply no longer enough. They are still really important, but they're no longer enough to deliver complex projects successfully. So we talk about the traditional triple constraint or iron triangle, still really important, but for complex projects, it's no longer enough. What we expect at the minimum is that project managers understand technical or functional specifications. We expect them to have an understanding of business skills, to be able to understand return on investment, benefits realization, and most importantly, we're seeing more and more the importance of stakeholders, which in medical devices it becomes more complex because those stakeholders are also patients, which is really important. The other challenge we also have is that organizations are actually looking for so much more from project managers. They're looking for project managers to take responsibility for change management in an organization, to lead strategic change through project, program, and portfolio management. That's a massive change that simply didn't happen 10 years ago. We're now at the stage where all mature organizations realize that all strategy gets executed through projects. Some organizations don't like to call it that, and they still talk about innovation or excellence or continuous improvement, but what we always find is when we remove the wrapping paper, there is always a project, a program, or a product underneath it somewhere. So these are massive changes that are happening at the moment, and it's really important that PMOs skill up. So what we can actually identify that for successful PMOs, for the more complex projects, we now need project managers who have really strong technical, the traditional project management skills. But we also need project managers with leadership skills, such as conflict resolution, communications, but we also need project managers with strategic and business management skills. They need to understand what is our pipeline, what is our go-to-market strategy. This is a very different change than the traditional PMs that we had years ago. If we were to define that, in the new era of project management, we need people with technical skills. We need people to understand what a framework is, such as PMBOK. But we also need people to understand the more agile approaches such as Scrum or Lean, and we also need project managers to understand project planning systems. I spoke to an organization a couple of weeks ago, and there actually are challenges to get visibility into 35,000 projects that they have working around the globe. So these are the challenges they have. If you haven't got project planning systems, that's going to be a massive challenge. In the leadership space, we need project managers who understand team building and leadership, how to deliver complex projects, and very important in a regulatory environment to understand the importance of governance and ethics. We also need project managers to understand strategic management because remember, PPM is the execution of strategy, and we also need PMs to understand the importance of project finance, especially when we see the cost of actually bringing a product to market in the modern era. So this is a quantum shift in terms of where we need to get to. If you have these skills and competencies, there's great opportunities ahead of you. If you don't have these skills and competencies, you've got to start identifying where are your weak points, and we all have them, by the way. There's nobody in the room who has this all figured out. and you need to start looking at those. This is where we're actually going to. These are the challenges ahead. And it's only by meeting those challenges that we actually will shatter the glass ceiling in project management. It always disappoints me in lots of organizations. You'll find the project managers will actually move out of that role or out of a product role into a different role because they've hit a ceiling in the project or product space in the organization. They have to get a new title in order to get to the C grade, as the case may be. And even with all of those things, the other challenge is so many organizations still don't get the basics right. So we need to do all these complicated things, but the essence of work breakdown structures, risk breakdown structures, resource breakdown structures, cost breakdown structures, these basic fundamentals we tend to be lacking, and we take the easy way out. Probably the most obvious one of those is it's very rare you see people using the whiteboard. That's the most effective planning tool of all. Using a whiteboard, getting people out behind their Microsoft project or whatever system they're using and get them to, make sense out of it. Look for innovation or methodologies. Look for win-wins between the different functional areas within the organization. When you have those figured out, then you go to your project planning system. The other thing that amazes me is there's a total misunderstanding, I'll just skip that one there, of what risk is in an organization. So in terms of most organizations, when they talk about their risk management approach, we generally see things like probability and impact, and this is how organizations understand risk. I'm sure most people in the room have seen this tool before, have they? Now, I would take a totally different view, and I would say, forget all that stuff. We need to look at risk in a totally different way. And the good news is, we're going to do that right now in a little exercise for less than 2 minutes. So, let me propose a project to you. The project that I'm proposing is I'm looking for an investment of €5 from you. How many people would invest in the project? Okay. What's the return? Now, okay, so this is the most important question. What's the return? So do you want to know risk versus return? So in terms of the return, you have an opportunity to double your investment. So you could get a return of 10. So it's a 100% return. However, it is a high-risk project. The other benefit is that it will fail early, or it will succeed early. It will also require very limited resources from your organization. You can outsource the whole thing, and you'll double your money or lose it. And bearing in mind, €5 is a relatively small sum of money. I'm sure in your organization you've seen people make much crazier judgments than I'm suggesting here. So on the basis of that there's a 100% potential return, how many people would now invest in the project? Okay? Now, if you said no, you're going to be asked why. How many people said no? This gentleman here, why would you not do it?
This is, as I understand it, the probability is 50-50, so my net value is 0, so I'll just keep my $5.
Keep your $5, okay. How many people didn't put their hand up at all? So you guys are saying, if we need to give him €5 to get on with the presentation, let's go ahead and do it. Now, so let me change the stakes slightly. I've now asked you to increase your investment by 20%. And I'm now asking you to invest €6. But the difference is that I'm now cautioning you as well that essentially, if you think about it, if you give me €5 or €6 and I take that and promise to double your money, it's no different to taking your money, putting it behind my back with my €5 or €6 and asking you to pick a hand. Essentially, it's gambling, which I think in principle is a foolish venture for anybody to engage in. So let's go again. How many people would now invest the €5 or €6 within the organization? Okay. No gamblers. Okay. So what has just happened in that 2 or 3 minutes discussion? Can anybody, what's happened? So what actually has happened is how you propose a project actually influences the attitude of the people. Within an organization, it's often who proposes the project, not how it's proposed. So if somebody senior suggests a project, we have groupthink. For a second, you think this is the most stupid idea in the world, but then you notice everyone else is nodding, and you say, yeah, that's a great idea, let's go for it. So what we're actually seeing is, if you think about it, how we propose a project drives attitude. What happens with attitude? Attitude becomes behavior. And what does consistent behavior over time become? Culture within an organization. So when we talk about risk management in an organization, it's not about probability and impact. It's actually understanding the risk culture in the organization, how A drives B drives C. Attitude drives behavior, drives culture, and how easy it is to influence attitude within an organization. So when we talk about risk management, it's never at the project level. If you're dealing with risk at that stage, you're already in trouble. Really, risk management is about understanding your entire portfolio. Risk management, the most important part, is up at the idea stage. If you're actually worrying about risk down here, really it's too late. You already have a failed project in your pipeline. Your job is simply to minimize the failure, and the problem with that is some high opportunity project suggested by somebody who doesn't have the political influence in the organization has been shelved to take on a pet project. So when we understand risk in an organization and project selection, it's the one area we have to be ruthless on. It's great to be flexible and adaptive, but when it comes to risk, and how you know very quickly in an organization, what I often do is I say, can I see a list of all projects that went through a formal proposal process that were refused that came from your senior executive team? And the shock is we have none. So it's just an assumption that senior leaderships don't make bad decisions, and I think history convinces us otherwise of that. So that's really important within an organization when we talk about risk. The other thing we have to bear in mind is that project management or portfolio management is essentially a competitive advantage. All organizations have competitors. Whether you're EBCG in conference management or an individual consultant like myself teaching project management. There are thousands of organizations and individuals around the world who offer the exact same services we do. It's very important to understand that when what you do is not unique, we need to understand that your competitive advantage is how you do it, and that's the role of PPM within an organization. The other thing that we need to look for, so important to product and portfolio management in an organization, is the development of organization agility. The ability to change your operating strategy, to shift your focus and seize opportunities before your competitors. That's a really important skill set to develop in an organization, and the only place it develops from is by developing talent management within your people. Leading organizations don't cut or reduce capability when there's a challenge. They face it and they ramp up. They skill up their people to be ready to deal with these challenges. If you actually look in terms of the financial crisis that happened over the last 10 years, there are organizations who actually kept their focus, they kept their core principles of advancing people, and those are the organizations who are better positioned to actually capitalize on that 100 billion opportunity over the next 5 years we're going to see now. The other thing I hear more and more is the talk about hybrid methodologies. People think that they can use PMBOK or Lean as some sort of silver bullet to advance project management within the organization. That simply doesn't happen. These are good practices. Leading organizations, they recognize they are not best practices, they are good practices. And they take principles of Lean, Agile, PMBOK, Six Sigma, and they actually take them and they internalize them with their own understanding of risk and opportunity within the organization, and they develop a far more fit for purpose, a tailored project management methodology to the organization and to the project. By the way, if you are interested in that, and I think it's a huge challenge for medical device organizations, we want the traditional sort of framework of governance, but we also want the flexibility and adaptive planning. I actually met somebody at one of these conferences a year ago, one of the delegates, a guy called John Roberts with Sun Pharma, and he'd written a book called Spiral Project Management. He's one of the delegates, and I actually met him, and I think he has written a really, really good book. If you're flying home, you can buy it for about $5 on Amazon, and it actually gives a very good understanding of how they've actually rolled that out within their organization. And that's when I said to you this morning that it's really important that you learn from the people within, because the opportunities are there. So I've actually introduced that into my own teaching for medical device and pharma companies, and I think what it's actually doing it in turn, they're starting to take that and they're actually, taking their own frameworks and methodologies to the next level. And that's a huge opportunity for me that I picked up by one of the conference participants. He wasn't a speaker or anything like that. He just came up to me, we had a chat, and now we're actually looking at rolling out some of those training programs to their different sites around the globe. So that's the opportunity that is in the room here. The question is, are we going to capitalize on it? So the other thing that is very important, if you really want to develop PPM competency in your organization, we need to understand the concept of levels. So in most organizations, they already categorize projects by level, whether it's level 1, 2, 3, or ABC, or silver, gold, platinum, they categorize projects. But what you'll rarely find is they never categorize the skills or competencies that are required to deliver a project at each of these levels. If you want to increase your success rate in your organization, one of the things you need to do is you need to have project managers progressing. They have to deliver successfully at this level before they progress. And very importantly, to retain that talent, you need to make sure that there's a financial reward for these people as they deliver at these levels within the organization. Now, the other thing we'll find in a PMO in a large organization, research indicates it takes about 7 years to get a return on investment on your PMO in a global organization. That's a hell of a long time. It's twice the typical length of a CEO's tenure. One of the most successful things I think you can do to focus on your PMO being of high value, instead of being the project police, become the supporting, the counselors. And how you do that, and the most successful, is you focus on knowledge sharing or knowledge harvesting. So anytime I'm involved in setting up a PMO, one of the first things I say, guys, don't think we've got it all figured out. I guarantee you there are excellent best practices happening out there across your different sites. What we have to do is we've got to find those and literally bring them into the PMO, let them see that we recognize the good work we're doing, standardize them, and share them across all projects and programs of work within the organization. So instead of you reinventing the wheel, you go and find all the wheels that are already there in your organization and you use those to drive your organization to the next level. The other thing that's so important is to look for synergy between your PM and your project sponsor. There's a huge amount of conflict or disconnect between PMs and sponsors within organizations. We need to think of your PM and your project sponsor a bit like being a pilot and an air traffic controller. They both do a totally different job, but they're equally important to landing and delivering your project successfully. That synergy or strategic fit, not just with the project and the organization, but actually between the people in the organization is very important. Unfortunately, 70% of project sponsors generally do a bad job, and it's not their fault. Organizations rarely invest in training project sponsors, so very often people are almost catapulted into that role and they have no understanding. It's actually quite common, you'll find, if you look at a project sponsor's history, they have actually got close to zero experience in delivering a project, yet they're supposed to be this mentor and this go-to person when your project hits a challenge. If we actually stop and think about it, we're actually creating the problems that we're often trying to solve. The other thing we need more support from our senior leadership team. Very often you'll find you get the support from your senior leadership at the project execution stage. But if we actually look at what's causing projects to fail, very often, as I said, it's right back at the idea stage or a poorly negotiated contract in a project. So what we really need to do is we need to harness that expertise that is there in your senior leadership team, but we need to make sure that it's relevant from day one in the project. Now, the other thing as well is when we talk about projects and change, if you think about it, projects sit down here in an organization at quite a low level. Your board are sitting at the very top, and your senior leadership team are probably somewhere close to that as well. Projects are supposed to drive change in the organization, but you can't drive that change horizontally. You have to drive the change vertically. So you've got to get the change to move from the project, the program, the portfolio, and all the way up, and to drive back down again. If you actually think about it, this model of how most organizations are built is it evolves back to the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago. We have advanced greatly, but we actually haven't changed our organization structures. When we talked about the importance of organization agility, we need to create flatter organizations. And very often you need to give project managers the ability to make decisions. This business of getting things approved all this stage, I understand it's important, but you're also losing that desire or that ability to develop organization agility, which is so important to organizations. So I would actually encourage you to look at the structure, how decisions are made, and how we structure projects within the organization. Essentially, what we need to understand is, if we want to deliver change, innovation, and continuous improvement, we've got to put projects and product management at the center of that. So organizations will always tell you about that they're driving change, that they're fostering innovation, and they're supporting continuous improvement. But where they fail to tell you is where project and product management sits at the center pillar to make all of these things happen. These are aspirational. This is execution. And this is what counts. Now, however, even if you have all of those things put together, what is the glue that sticks it together? These are processes and tools and methodologies that I'm talking about, but the most important thing is actually something totally different. What I'd like to do here, assuming the technology is going to work, I'm going to play a video, and what I would like you to do is just to shout out anything that comes to your head when the video is on. Maybe you hit play there. Just maybe click in the video, please. Sorry, just down here. Yeah, good man. Okay, we don't need sound, by the way. Sound isn't so important. Oops, I just popped that over. Just jump down here, have a little look. No problem. No problem. Oh, frig. Okay, so I want you to watch this video here. This is a teenager. She's about, well, it's a group of teenagers, but I wanted you to look at one of them specifically. By the way, this is how you're all going to look when running to the bar afterwards. You see that? That's me out in front. Do you see there? Now, so I want you to take a look at this and just shout out anything that comes to mind. So it's less than 2 minutes. Bear with me. I think this is the individual here, but things change. Like in a project, like in life. She's not pacing herself, perhaps. Overconfident. Now, by the way, if you run to the bar like that earlier, you're going to see next how you're going to arrive here tomorrow morning. There you are. See at the back? So she's suffering. What else is happening? She's persevering. She's probably about 19. I have a teenage daughter. She's 13. Her idea of hardship is having slow Wi-Fi. So there's not much in the difference. Okay, so what do you see from that video, guys? What can you see there? Perseverance, okay. By the way, this is her celebrating with her teammates afterwards in the ambulance. So she's actually in a stretcher in the ambulance, and her teammates are in there. Teamwork. What motivates her? Is it the money? Yeah. Okay. I've never heard that answer before, right? Okay. So I don't think it's the money. It's first year or third level. If anything, they're probably paying to be on that race. They're paying to be there. So what is it? The team. So there's the belief in team. What else? Reaching a goal. Responsibility. Passion. Perseverance. And all these things, I think, come from having a sense of purpose within the organization. So I think that's really important, is that In an organization, the sense of a team, the building of a team, that team dynamic is incredibly important. So research indicates that an engaged individual will deliver 4 times at the rate than a disengaged individual. So what I think is very important is the development of team, but that only comes from leadership, which is your responsibility. I've no doubt here that you all have teams of people reporting to you, and I think it's really important that you give the individuals and your teams a sense of empowerment, a sense of purpose. So we often have heard this kind of mantra phrase about getting the right people on the bus. But it's actually the full phrase, if we look at it, is you've got to get the right people on the bus, you've got to get them in the right seats, and you've got to get the wrong people off the bus, which is the greatest challenge of all, because people have to be treated with dignity and respect. But if you don't address that issue, you are failing in your responsibility as a leader. I always say to people, if you think leadership is to make everyone happy, it's not. If you want to make everyone happy, what should you do? Sell ice cream. That's the only job I know where you're guaranteed to make everyone happy. Part of your job as a leader is to engage your people, to develop them. You have to, and that doesn't mean you're soft, by the way. Just because you care about people, it doesn't mean that you're soft. If you really care about your people, you will want them to achieve their full potential. And that means you're going to create challenges for them. But what's very important is with those challenges must come opportunities. If all you do is create challenges for other people and opportunities for yourself, well, that's not leadership, that's simply manipulation. And it's very important we do that within the organization. Just watching the time here, I'm going to conclude, guys, by saying to you that tools, techniques are really, really important, and processes and governance. But if you don't actually have the people think right in your organization, nothing else is actually going to work. Thank you very much for your time.